So with that said, if you do have something that you would like to ask, feel free to start typing away, and we'll try to jump into that as best we can here. So. And we are recording. I actually forgot to start the recording right away, but I got it going now, which is probably the most important part as far as answering questions if there happen to be any. So like I said, if you have some, fire away. So we did have one question come in already. Will elementary students be eating lunch in their rooms? Where will junior high students be eating? And will they be eating in smaller shifts and distancing? So to start the school year, we're not going to be having students eat lunch in their classrooms, regardless of the end of the building that we're talking about. So at the elementary, our overall goal, our overall plan on that end of the building is to try to cohort students according to their grade level. So obviously keep kindergarten kids with kindergarten kids during the day, first graders with first graders, so on and so forth, all the way down. We feel with the way our facilities are set up that we can accommodate 2 elementary grades in the lunchroom at the same time, keeping them spaced out, making sure that they're entering the lunchroom in shifts so we don't have multiple classes bunched up or lined up together while they're going through the lunch lines. At the junior high and high school, we're going to kind of take a similar approach. Basically what we're looking at there is, in the past, we've had 2 separate lunch periods where we've had 7th through 9th and 10th through 12th. We're going to split that up into 3 different lunch periods this year and use kind of a homeroom setup over lunch to try to space things out a little bit better. Again, we'll have some type of assigned seating. We'll put kids on different ends of the lunchroom, keep them spaced out, try to do our best to make sure that we're not getting everybody together and not being able to distance as best we can during that particular time period. Now, obviously, as conditions change and things get, I don't want to necessarily use the word worse, but if we start to see more cases pop up in the building or things in the community seem to be trending upward, then we're going to have to sit down and we're going to have to reevaluate where we are, what we think is working and what might not be working. And some of that might include having to make alterations to the lunch schedule. So hopefully that kind of answers that question a little bit as far as that goes. Got another one here. Just let me copy and paste this one in. All right, so in a situation where a student either tests positive or is a close contact of a positive test and has to be kept at home for an extended period, but may not feel ill at all, will students be able to participate in the classroom via Zoom or Google Classrooms or a similar platform? So that's a good question. That's kind of one of the things I alluded to a little bit earlier. So what we are planning to do, and the specifics may vary a little bit depending on whether we're talking K-5, 6-8, or 9-12. But our intention right now is to set up some type of camera system in the classroom. So students that maybe aren't there but are well enough to work, or even maybe at the time if they're not well enough to work, would have the opportunity to either participate and watch the class live in some type of Zoom setting, or we use a lot of Microsoft Teams here at the school, which essentially works the same way as Zoom. So they can either watch or participate live, or we would make a recording of that and make it available for those kids to be able to watch at a later time. That would be something that we really tried to focus in on, because we understand that, like this question kind of points out, that there might be situations in which kids, even staff members, are going to be asked to stay at home just because of their proximity to someone that has actually tested positive. Likewise, there's a lot of different scenarios that have popped up as far as someone actually testing positive and maybe not exhibiting a whole lot of symptoms either. So we just want to make sure that we're prepared on that end to be able to keep kids caught up in the event that they're going to have to spend potentially 10 or more days outside of the school building. And I will, and again, if you have more questions, feel free to keep them coming. We don't have much sitting here right now, so feel free to ask away. Along those lines, I will tell you that the Department of Health has basically dictated to us as superintendents across the state that they're going to communicate with us. So in the event that we get a positive case in our district somewhere, the Department of Health is supposed to be calling me directly to let me know what's going on, what the scenario is, and is supposed to help walk us through everything and kind of give us their recommendations on what we should do in those cases. One of the things when we first started planning for all this earlier this summer, a lot of people kind of brought up whether it was the question, the point that it would be nice if we could have some clear-cut numbers as far as, if we get this many cases, we're going to close the building. If we get this many cases, we're going to do this, so on and so forth. That's not really something that we can give you right now. But what we can tell you is that the Department of Health is going to help us walk through those situations as best we can, and start contacting people and decide what we need to do moving forward to try to make things, try to clean things up a little bit. And on another point along with that, even though the Department of Health is going to be contacting us when we get positive cases, we still want to emphasize to parents the importance of reaching out to us in the event that there's a positive test in your family, because we certainly understand with what's going on across the state and the Department of Health's expectation that they're going to try to contact all the schools in these cases. They might just not have the staff to be able to do that. And we understand that there could be delays in that process. So in the event that you have something that comes up in your family, we would certainly appreciate you reaching out to either me or Mr. Voss, depending on which building your child is in, so we know what's going on as soon as possible. Again, if you have other questions, concerns, feel free to toss those in the chat box right now. All right, got another one here. And I figured this question would come up, and I'm glad that it did. So, can you elaborate on the mask policy in the classrooms, hallways, during passing time, PE, etc.? So, the way that we're approaching masks depends on the tier or the phase that we happen to be in, whether we're in green, yellow, and obviously if we're in red, we're not going to be in the building. Focusing on those first two. So depending on what conditions are like in the community determines the tier that we're going to be in. If we're going to be in green, as of right now, we're going to be highly recommending the use of masks and encouraging the use of masks across the district, specifically in situations when social distancing is not possible. And one of the things that we added into our plan is that the individual teachers, regardless of the scenario or the situation or the tier that we happen to be in, are allowed to require masks at any point whenever they want to. And part of the reason we arrived at that particular spot with that topic is just because obviously teachers are going to fall into a category in which they are potentially a little bit more vulnerable than our students would be. And we don't want to put them in a situation where they don't feel comfortable in the classroom or in different areas of the building. So that's why we put that particular element into our plan. Now, if we progress to yellow, where we feel things are a little more, say, trending upward in the community, or we're starting to see some cases in our building, then we're going to look at requiring masks, particularly in certain areas of the building. So, for example, passing times, different areas where we have large groups of students that happen to be congregating or passing one another. May potentially look at mandating and requiring masks in classrooms in certain situations. And again, looking at those situations where trying to maintain distancing is just not going to work. Elementary, I think things will look a little bit different as far as the requirements that could be placed on masks, simply because we're already trying to cohort based on grade level when it comes to K through 5, and trying to keep those kids with one another and not intermixing the grades. Oh, I just realized I didn't send that last question to everyone. I'll post it up here a second, but everybody gets the general idea of what I'm after there. But anyway, at the elementary, things are going to look a little bit different because of the cohorts in those classes. But we certainly understand that there's going to be situations where the individual classroom teacher, if they're working in a close one-on-one setting, or if we have students working in groups, that masks would probably be a wise choice in order to try to protect everyone as best we can. Now, to kind of expand on that a little bit more, I have had some phone calls from some different parents and people throughout the community a little concerned about the mask topic and what direction it's going to go. Obviously, no one wants to wear a mask. When I go to the grocery store or, go to the gas station, I don't particularly enjoy wearing a mask, but I certainly understand why masks are important. And I guess what I've kind of been telling people that I've talked to on a one-on-one basis is, last spring was not a particularly enjoyable situation for a lot of people in terms of being remote, not being in the building, trying to make kids learn from a distance. And obviously, if we could find ourselves in a situation or a scenario where we didn't have to require masks, that would be best case scenario for everybody. But if we get into a situation where we start having cases pop up and we're looking at potentially having to close the building again, I think it only makes sense that we would at least try to use masks to some degree on some level so we can try to keep the building open as long as possible. What if a student chooses not to wear a mask? That is a fun question to address. So obviously, this kind of falls into one of those categories where we haven't necessarily, obviously it's going to be a building level decision. I know at the 6 through 12 end, we're hoping to dive into some of this stuff, next week when we get staff in the building and expand on it even a little bit more the end of next week to try to figure out what's going to be the best course of action for that. I know each different school or different schools that I've talked to have all kind of taken a different approach to what they're going to do there. Obviously, there's going to be some type of consequence one way or another. I'm hoping that we can get, whether it's students or staff or whoever it might be, to understand that, like I just explained before, the importance of wearing a mask and the potential for wearing a mask to maybe allow us to keep our building open as opposed to having to close. But I would guess when push comes to shove, when it really comes down to it, if we're going to have a student that's going to refuse to wear a mask in an area where we feel masks are appropriate, we're going to have to do something to remove them from that situation. Now, whether it means we're going to have to call their parent and send them home, or find some alternative way to remedy that situation, that's more than likely what it's going to come down to in order to keep things moving in the right direction. Again, if you have some more questions, feel free to throw them out there. I'm trying to think off the top of my head here if there's anything else that kind of jumped into my mind here talking that would be of importance to try to share with everybody. I know the mask thing was going to be I assumed it would be a relatively big topic of conversation because I've already had some calls from some parents kind of asking or inquiring about that. I do have another message here. Make sure that I send it to everyone. All right. Next question, will any classes be held outside? We have had a lot of conversations with our PE teachers and music teachers in particular about trying to utilize the outdoors to the extent that we can, particularly early on in the school year when the weather is still going to cooperate with us. You know, PE is one of those things where it should be, you know, it's relatively easy to be able to hold a class like that outside, and we would probably emphasize trying to do that as much as possible while we can. Like I said, in speaking with some of the music teachers, that is something that we have put out there as an option as far as trying to hold those classes outside. As far as just regular classes in general, I don't know that we've had those conversations yet. I guess what I would say on that end is I certainly wouldn't discourage it if teachers feel like that they can get their goals accomplished in that particular setting. Based on the research that's out there, that would suggest that, you know, attempting to try to get outside in that particular environment would be helpful. So it's certainly, again, something that if a teacher brought that up or was inquiring about whether or not they could do that, I think it's certainly something worth considering. What will happen if a student doesn't pass a screening, whether it is before school or during the day? So essentially, the first thing that we're going to do when we screen in the morning, well, particularly we're going to screen in the morning, but we have talked about screening multiple times throughout the day. What we're looking at there is going to be, so we're going to include a temperature check, and to start with, we'll probably have a list of, you know, symptoms, and we'll kind of run through that. In an effort to try to shorten the process, we have talked about, again, trying to get information regarding symptoms out to parents ahead of time so they can have conversations with their children about the different things that they should be looking for. And then we think we can kind of speed up that process a little bit when kids get to school, so we can maybe limit it to a temperature check and then simply just asking, you know, do you have any symptoms? But until we kind of get everybody trained on that, it might be a little bit longer process when we get there. Now, as far as what happens if a student doesn't pass a screening, Part of the reason that we wanted to include a temperature check in the screening process is because it's the one element or one aspect of the screening that is the most objective. It's not a matter of the person there having to interpret whether somebody has a cough, has a runny nose, has a sore throat, so on and so forth. So that's going to be one of the primary things we're looking for. And obviously we're going to need parents to try to help us as best we can when it comes to the other symptoms, because obviously you know your child better than we know your child when it comes to some of those things. So any screening that we can get done before they get to the building is going to be very helpful. Now with that said, if we end up with a student that has a high temperature or we notice some other symptoms, if it's just a temperature issue, what we're going to do is we're going to find a designated area for that student to go. And we want to give them a little bit of time to acclimate to the school, where then we would probably give them another temperature check just to confirm that that is actually the case and that they have a high temperature. And when I talk about a high temperature, the recommendations that are coming to us are a temperature that is 100.4 or higher. So we're talking about something that is a somewhat significant temperature reading. And what I can tell you is this summer, when it's been, weight room supervision or some of the different open gyms that have taken place, I don't know that we've had temperatures that have been even remotely close to, that 100.4 mark. So, we're really looking for something that is significant in that particular, setting. But again, we would take that student to a different, a designated area, allow them opportunity to acclimate. We'd retake the temperature, we'd rescreen. More than likely, if they end up in that situation, we would probably mask the student immediately, just kind of based on recommendations from our healthcare professionals, just to make sure that in the event that we, end up with somebody that we think has symptoms consistent with COVID, that we're doing the best to try to limit their ability to pass it on. So after we'd go through the screening process and determine that, okay, it's probably in the best interest of everybody for this student to go home, we would contact the parents. And again, we would have a designated area for these students to go to wait for their parents to come pick them up from the school building. Now, the specifics of how we're going to have kids come into the building in the morning and where the screening processes are going to take place, we're still kind of working through what those specific protocols are going to be and the time frame that we're hoping to have that accomplished. Obviously, when you start thinking about K through 5 and 6 to 12, potentially the majority of those kids coming into the building at the same time, we got to be really careful about how we decide where they're going to come in, if they're going to have designated areas, if each class is going to potentially come in a different door, so on and so forth. So again, the idea there is to try to do our best to make sure that we're screening the kids, but also doing it in a manner that doesn't provide for a bunch of students grouped together in a small area at the same time. So I did have another question. Oh, I already put it in here. That came in. And I don't know that I have a great answer to this question, but oops. Any increase in outside recess time to allow kids to have a break from a mask? And that is actually a good question. If we're going to get into a situation where we're saying that having students, staff members, whatever the case, wear masks is in our best interest, and it provides us an opportunity to keep the building open longer than we normally would under other circumstances, I think we need to be looking for opportunities to try to increase that, the amount of time where students would be given the opportunity to not have to wear their masks. So trying to increase opportunities for them to be distanced from each other. If it's in the building, even potentially situations where we could keep them spaced out, but certainly trying to get them out of the building to try to give them a break from that. Because again, I know just in my own experiences, going to the grocery store and spending 45 minutes in there, by the time you're ready to leave, your face is hot and it's just not particularly comfortable. And the first thing you do when you walk out is want to get that thing off your face. So I certainly understand the need for trying to do something there to give kids and staff members a break from that type of thing. I did have another question come in here. What will breakfast look like? So obviously, the protocols that we have in place to start the school day are going to end up looking different than they have in the past. I know Mr. Voss has already put in some work on his end to try to figure out how he's going to filter students into the building, how we're going to separate them as far as kids that utilize that breakfast service and those that don't. More than likely, the kids for breakfast will still eat their breakfast in the lunchroom, at least to start the school year. And obviously, if things start going a different direction and we have to make changes or alterations to that particular process, we will do that. And we've already had conversations with our food service people about the different ways that we can handle that, whether it be eating in the lunchroom, whether it be some type of grab and go where they take it to the classroom, or even serving. Well, I guess I say even if it's grab and go, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a cold breakfast. There's still, those ladies do a really good job making sure that they can still give kids a lot of options, even if it is in that particular situation with some type of sack lunch or something like that. So we want to try to keep that normal for the kids that do that. Obviously, on both ends of the building, when kids come in, we're not going to have them congregate in areas in large group settings. So Mr. Voss will have designated areas, whether it's kids going directly to the classroom after they come in the building or going to breakfast. I know at the middle school, high school side of the building, Mr. Massey and Mr. Faulkner have already put a lot of thought into how we want to handle those same protocols on our end of the building. And more than likely what that's going to look like is, again, if you want to eat breakfast, trying to allow those students the opportunity to eat breakfast in the lunchroom, and maybe filtering everybody else to a homeroom or potentially even their first period class right away until the day actually gets started. Looks like we got another one here. Do elementary teachers, or those that have lunchroom duty, have the leeway to take classes outside to eat? I don't necessarily want to speak for Mr. Voss on this, but I will say that at the elementary, Mr. Voss is typically the one that takes care of all the lunch duty down there. So, and that's mostly his effort to try to give those teachers a break from duties during that particular time frame. So I'm under the impression that he's going to continue, even though we're going to have a couple extra lunch sessions and we're going to limit it to 2 classes at a time in there. I believe the plan is going to be to still have still have lunch in the lunchroom. And I don't know that he would be taking students outside to eat lunch, although just like anything else that we've had come up with this situation and planning, it's certainly something that I hadn't thought about, and I don't know if it's anything that Mr. Voss had thought about, but it's certainly something that could be considered on that end of the building. And I might, let's see. Mr. Massey, I don't know if you are paying attention or not, but I'm going to unmute you for a second. Are you there?
Yep.
Okay. I just didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to contribute as far as that that question about protocols in the morning. I know you and Mr. Faulkner are kind of the ones that have been trying to plan, and I know you're going to meet with staff next week a little bit about how exactly we're going to make that work, but I didn't know if there's anything you wanted to add on that end.
I mean, we're still trying to decide where we want to screen the kids and how we're going to kind of get them into the building in a fashion that's quick and safe for everyone. We haven't worked a lot of details out yet, and it's kind of one of those things we're going to wait till next week when we can get a few more staff members in and kind of test some of it out to see what actually works and what just looks good on paper. So
Okay.
what you
Well,
said is, yeah, what you said pretty much kind of is what we got so far. So.
All right, thank you. Looks like we got another question in here. Will band students be provided instrument covers for their instruments? Oddly enough, I just had a conversation with Mrs. Whip today, specifically about how we're going to handle some of the band stuff at the high school side of the building. And as far as our schedule goes there, first semester, we are not planning on having a group band class in the traditional setting that we've had before. But our homeroom sessions over lunchtime, obviously we've set those up to try to space lunch out, but also in my conversations with her, we're going to try to use that time period as an opportunity for her to pull students in smaller groups. Whether it's I'm going to take the sophomore band students this day and I'm going to take the freshman band students the next day and still try to work on some different things. And even though we're not going to offer band in the traditional setting, at least initially, still give those students an opportunity that are enrolled in band to still continue playing, and also give them the opportunity to still get credit for doing that, even though it might not be in the traditional setting. And lessons, individual lessons are still going to take place throughout the day. As far as instrument covers, in our conversations this morning, we didn't think that that was a direction that we were going to go, based on, the structure that we were going to go with as far as the smaller group settings, the different precautions that would be in place for the teachers, the potential for trying to take care of some of that stuff outdoors if possible, and also taking into consideration that we have consulted with the control company out of Sioux Falls that takes care of our HVAC system and does all the controlling there, to try to make sure that we have things set up as efficiently as possible to not only filter the air, but also try to increase the amount of outdoor air that we're pulling into the building and circulating throughout the building. So we didn't think it was something that we were going to jump into right away on that end of things. I'm going to go back here a second. Mr. Voss, I don't know if you're there. I'm going to try to unmute you or let you unmute yourself if you're paying attention. I was going to give him. I just wanted to say, I don't know if there's anything else. I know we talked about. I'm kind of going off the cuff here a little bit with some of the elementary stuff as far as your screening processes in the morning or your lunch stuff, and I don't want to be too far off base. So I don't know if there's anything you want to throw in there.
I believe my kids go to the playground, and every grade will have a designated area, and then we are going to stagger them coming into the building. We are going to work out the kinks with some of our paras and teachers next week on when and where we're going to do the screening in the morning. But the one correction I do want to say is the elementary is going to have 3 grades in the lunchroom spaced out. Since we're going to be potted, there will be 3 kids or 3 grades in the lunchroom at a time.
Okay, and that's my fault. I guess I was thinking on our end of the building what we're trying to do. So.
And I've put together an action plan at the elementary level. The staff and I are going to talk about that next week, and then that will get sent out to the parents so they can kind of see how we're going to handle everything at the elementary, since we're a little bit different.
You certainly are a little bit different.
I'll take that as a compliment.
It was a compliment, so that's good to know. All right, well, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that is there anything else you got, or does that kind of cover most of it?
As far as the kids coming in the building, we're going to stagger the dismissal time. The buses will be at the elementary first. So we're going to have a 10-minute staggered where grades from opposite ends of the building will go out to the bus. And we're going to do the same thing in the mornings.
Okay. All right. Thank you. With all of the prep taking extra time, will Flyer Fridays be a normal day of school? So as far as all the precautions and different things that we're putting in place, we're not anticipating that that's going to actually be reducing any of our instructional time. Now, as far as Flyer Fridays are concerned, I think, and I know I'm speaking personally here in my own opinion, I think Flyer Fridays have been something that's worked out really well for us. Obviously, on a couple different levels. One being we give students an opportunity to get some extra one-on-one help in those situations where they need it. But at the same time, even some of the students that maybe don't necessarily utilize Flyer Fridays consistently or maybe even at all, they're also benefiting a little bit from the setup of those days, just in the sense that the regular classroom teacher is able to kind of continue on and maybe push some of those students a little bit more, knowing that they're going to have those Flyer Fridays to be able to fall back on to help get some of the other students caught up with some of those same concepts. So Flyer Friday was not something that we wanted to eliminate or reduce this year. Now, depending on what the circumstances are, where we are, what things look like, we have had some discussions about whether we would make some of the sessions with Flyer Friday potentially remote, just to have another day where there would be less people in the building. But again, I don't think that there's any substitute for in-person learning if that is available or if we can make that happen. So obviously, even if we continue to do in-person instruction with students on Flyer Fridays, the number of students that we have in the building will be reduced in comparison to what a normal day would be. Not to mention that we do have the ability on those days to stagger things out in the event that we do have, larger number of students that need to come and utilize those services. So long story short, no, we didn't plan on changing Flyer Fridays into a normal school day, although depending on how things pan out, we could potentially increase the time frame during which we would try to provide services to students if it helps us to limit the number of kids that are in the building at one time. So, but that is a good question. We still have plan to go for about an hour. And I think all things considered, this is going relatively smoothly. So if people do have more questions, I'm happy to sit here and try to answer as many as we can. And if we get to the point here where it looks like we're kind of hitting a standstill, we can certainly end things for the evening also. But again, if you feel like you have a question, anything at all, please feel free to throw it down there in the chat box, and we'll try to keep working away at some of these. And again, I'm kind of just trying to think if there's anything that would have popped up off the top of my head that we haven't touched on yet that could be of importance. Oh, I guess, maybe I've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but as we've been going through trying to plan our different scenarios, and if you've looked at the document that we put together and put out, obviously one of our primary goals is we want to try to keep the school building open as long as possible throughout the school year. And obviously, depending on what's going on, that's going to look a little bit different depending on the phase. But some of the things that we have talked about in the event that things get to a point where we have to consider something that is different than the traditional in-person learning, whether we're going to try to stagger things or whether we're going to transition to remote learning for some students. Our primary goal is to try to keep, obviously, everybody in the building as long as we can, but particularly students at the elementary end of the building. I think when it comes to trying to do remote instruction for 9-12 and even 6 through 8 is a lot more feasible than trying to come up with something for K-5 that is effective or as effective as it would be if we were in the traditional setting. And that doesn't have anything to do with the people that are trying to do that or anything. It's just the nature of the different, I guess it's just the different way that instruction comes across to those kids. Packets are great, but obviously a packet is no substitute for being in the actual classroom. At the high school side, we can record lessons. We can have kids participate in Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, and that works out fine. But at the elementary level, sometimes those kids don't have the supports in place during the regular day because of parents working or different circumstances to be able to make something like that work. So the more we can do to try to keep K through 5 and even 6 through 8 in the building, we're certainly going to attempt to try to do that before we would transition to remote learning for everyone. We got another question here. Any thoughts about the use of locker room showers for before school athletic practices? That, in all honesty, is not a question that I have spent a whole lot of time thinking about. What I can say on that end, and this kind of, it maybe isn't directly related to that. A lot of the information that we've been getting from the Department of Health, and a lot of the information that's been coming out of a lot of the research from, CDC and some bigger health organizations, really emphasizes trying to put practices in place that take into account that the spread of the virus is mostly due to air particles or droplets in the air. Obviously, there are situations where touching things and touching your face and different things of those manners could potentially transmit the virus. And it never hurts to emphasize washing hands and different things like that, or wiping things down. We're kind of operating under the assumption that we're still going to wipe things down and we're still going to try to take extra cleaning precautions, but the ability of the virus to be transmitted that way probably isn't as significant as it would be through airborne particles. So as far as the showers and things, it's probably something that we're going to have to keep an eye on and figure out exactly how we want to do that, particularly when it comes to practices where if we are going to practice before school, obviously kids need to have the opportunity to get ready for school. And some people don't have the ability or the means to be able to go home to do that. So it's certainly something that we're going to have to look at and determine if we're going to have to make any alterations either to practice schedules or how we would handle that particular protocol. We got another one here. How is choir going to work this year? So I might have Mr. Voss come back in and talk about here in a second what they're going to try to do at the elementary, because I don't want to misspeak at all on that end. What I can tell you at the high school, and this is another conversation I had today when Mrs. Whip came in to talk about some of the band stuff. Right now we have high school choir classes on the schedule as a traditional setting like we always have before. However, we still have not made a final decision on what exactly those classes are going to look like, whether we're going to plan on holding them in the traditional sense, as far as singing and potentially having, 30 to 40 kids in a room, which obviously makes me relatively nervous. Or if we're going to try to break things down a little bit and try to, section them off and only deal with small groups, or if we're going to take even a different approach and try to focus more on what I think the elementary is going to focus on, which is more of the music appreciation and kind of learning more about music as opposed to actually singing and increasing the likelihood that, we're putting more particles into the air. So obviously we don't want to get into a situation where we are eliminating any of those course offerings or opportunities for students. We just want to make sure that we're going about them in the safest way possible. Now, as far as middle school goes, the middle school setup is a little bit different in the sense that we split those kids pretty evenly between music and PE at the same time. So for example, if 7th graders are supposed to have music and PE, the girls would be in choir and the boys would be in PE, or vice versa. So we're talking about getting down to situations where we have approximately 10 students in the room at the same time, which is, considerably different than when we're talking about having 30 plus kids in high school mixed choir. So I think something that is doable, although again, as we get a little bit closer here and start having some more conversations about those types of things, we have to take into consideration that we may have to emphasize some other areas of the music instruction that aren't always focused on singing in the traditional sense. Now with that said, Mr. Voss, I'm going to ask you to unmute again if you're there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, and you can kind of expand on your elementary stuff a little bit on how you're going to handle that down there.
Mr. Kunz was correct. We are going, at least for the first semester, and we'll reevaluate at the second semester. First semester, we are going to treat music classes and music appreciation. There will not be any singing. There will not be a Christmas concert. And she will social distance the kids in the music room, so we are going to have it in the music room, but it's going to be learning music appreciation.
All right, thank you. And like I said, some of this on the high school end is going to come down to having some more conversations with the teachers about, what their comfort level is, but also what we think is reasonable for how we want to approach that type of thing. And hopefully, as we progress into the school year, things start working out a little better than I guess maybe we're anticipating they're going to be, and we can start getting back into those things in more of the traditional sense of how it's working. So. Other questions? Said we still got a couple minutes left. If people have questions they want to throw out there, we're certainly not going to just cut everything off at 7 o'clock if we feel like we have some more value in what we can share here. And again, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else we might have skipped over or that I'm thinking of that would be of importance. I do not know how many of you that are in on this utilize bus services. One of the conversations that we've had, and I know in some cases this is not going to be a particularly popular decision, but we have had some talks about eliminating some of the in-town bus stops just to try to keep the numbers on our buses at a reasonable level so we can keep kids spaced out on the buses. And again, I realize that is going to end up being an inconvenience for some people, but at the same time, that in-town bus thing is one of those things that's it's not an obligation that we are required to fulfill. We've just kind of done it for, several years just because we've been, I guess, had the opportunity to do that. But we're just thinking if we can cut down on the number of kids that are on those buses on a daily basis, it would probably be in the best interest of everybody as far as safety-wise. Other than that, like I said, I'll give it a couple minutes here if somebody has any questions they want to follow up with or anything they have to go. And if we don't hear anything here in the next couple minutes, I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. I do want to say thank you. And I realize there's not a whole slew of people that are in on this call right now, but I do want to thank everyone that did take the time tonight to join in on this. We appreciate your questions. And at the same time, we appreciate the input that we've gotten from families, from teachers throughout this process as we tried to plan. Those that have been actively involved with the committees that we put together to try to come up with a logical and reasonable way to approach this thing. We certainly appreciate your willingness to jump in. And I know that there's been other people in addition to those survey responses and different things that have taken the time to call me specifically and ask questions and voice their concerns. And again, that's one of those things where we certainly don't think our plan is perfect. And we like to hear from people about what they think. Because obviously, if there's concerns or questions about what we're doing and we don't know about them, it becomes awful difficult for us to try to adjust and make things work based on what those concerns might be. So again, we do appreciate the input that we've gotten from people as far as this whole planning process is concerned. So, and we will do our best to try to communicate with everybody as best we can if things happen to change, or even just based on what the conditions are and what we're thinking about doing one way or the other. So with that said, I don't know that we have any more questions coming in. So I'm going to wrap things up tonight. Just again, remember, we did record this. So if you happen to run into somebody that was unable to make it tonight, we are going to post a recording of the video on the website. I realize we didn't record the first part with me yammering on about the plan, but I don't think anybody's going to be too disappointed about that. But we did make sure to get the recording on as soon as the questions started coming in. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns that you think of after the meeting, feel free to call or send an email, and we'll try to answer those as best we can. So thanks again.